On this episode of the GeoTrek podcast, we interview New Jersey's most trusted meteorologist, Joe Martucci, who shares a lot of lessons for weather and science communicators after a lifelong journey living and working in the state of New Jersey. Hey everyone, I'm Hurricane Hal, host of the GeoTrek podcast, where we explore the world to bring you stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. We're so excited about this conversation on this episode with Joe Martucci, who's going to share a lot of insights about how to improve our weather and science communication. Hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow our content on your favorite podcast platform, as well as on social media. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel. You can actually watch each podcast in full video form on the GeoTrek YouTube channel. Well, without further introduction, let's jump into this episode of the GeoTrek podcast with meteorologist Joe Martucci. Joe, thank you so much for taking time to come on the GeoTrek podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome, Hal. Appreciate being on. It's a pleasure.
Joe, so tell me about your interest in meteorology. Like, how did you get interested in this field? Was there like a big weather event when you were a kid, or what sparked your interest in meteorology?
Yeah, so no big weather event. And I know, for many of my friends and colleagues, it's that way. But it's just, what I will say is similar to most, my friends and colleagues that have been wanting to do this for a long time. In fact, one of the first things I can ever remember is being in my grandma's basement, and Al Roker, is now in the Today Show, but at the time was on local NBC in New York City, was on TV. I remember like my grandma or my aunt saying like, look, Joe, it's going to be you when you get older. And I remember thinking to myself then like, yes, I want to talk about the weather. That's going to be me. So I must have wanted to done it since before that. And now I'm doing it.
Yeah, and you've bin born and bred in New Jersey, right? So kind of there in the mid-Atlantic most of your life, right?
That is correct. I've never lived or worked or I was born in New Jersey too. So yes, I've been in New Jersey my whole life. Different parts of New Jersey, as you know, Hal, there's different parts, but I've been in New Jersey.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're excited to hear also about your professional path. It seems like a lot of people take different paths into working in the weather field. Tell us about your path. Like, how did you get from that interest as a child to what you're doing professionally today?
Yeah, so I went to Rutgers University right here in Jersey, got my meteorology degree, and I think similar to a lot of meteorologists, it's the first time you actually meet other people who want to do the same thing as you and are the same age as you, at the same time. So at Rutgers, I learned to understand weather. I met friends. My wife went to Rutgers too, and I really personally broke out of my shell, being at Rutgers, and then from there, I actually had a job. Before I graduated, I had a job offer before I graduated college to work at a tiny TV station called WMBC, the Mountain Broadcast Company, as a TV reporter. No weather, just reporting. And I said, well, hey, look, I got a job offer before I started, college. I'm just going to take it. I mean, that's great. Didn't work out. And, that's fine. Like I was good with it. I think my manager at the time was good with it too. But, and led me, what I learned was, never burn bridges, always leave on positive terms. And, and I realized that, I was really interested in weather more than the reporting. From there, though, I went to WeatherWorks, and that's a consulting company in New Jersey. And there I learned so much about the weather there, how the very intense meteorological training, reading METARs or airport codes, learning about the real micro meteorology of the mid-Atlantic. But then I also, learned things like learned how to work all hours, all days of the week, holidays, and eventually was able to learn how to develop a social media presence and do radio and sales also. That led me to my job at the Press of Atlantic City, which is where I spent 6.5 years there as part of formerly Berkshire Hathaway, and then Lee Enterprises, where I learned to really do media full time and how to be self-sufficient. At the time when I was hired in 2017, there was only one other person that was working full time as a meteorologist at a newspaper, even though most of what I was doing was digital. So really kind of being ahead of that curve, and then, being a journalist, learning how to write, quoting, interviewing people. And then I also worked at News 12 as a freelancer, which is live TV and the polish and the makeup, but also, crafting a weather story in, a minute 30, 2 minutes. And now I'm here where I own my own company.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, this is really interesting because you took this path where, you're getting that degree and then you're doing consulting work that led to, I think, improving your understanding of meteorology. But then it seems like you've had a lot of these different opportunities in the media world, right? Which is rapidly evolving. It seemed like it kind of set you up to be really versatile and really set up to do well and do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I think the lesson, the life lesson is you always want to take something from everything you do, even if you don't like it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that, and what you said about burning bridges too, a lot of our young professionals, they might have 3 or 4 or 5 different organizations they work with early in their career, and you want to have a positive vibe with all those. Joe, you mentioned that you're president of a Cup of Joe Weather and Drone. Tell us a little bit about the company that you're running now. I mean, what is it you're doing? What's your vision and your goals?
Yeah, so my vision is to own the Jersey Shore, Hal. But we have 3 lanes of revenue, right? So on the weather side, we have my Shorely Safe program that helps towns streamline weather communications and increase public awareness of what the town is doing to mitigate against weather, particularly flooding. And it also helped to increase, and I think we're going to talk about this, but the FEMA CRS or Community Rating System score. Then I also have a weather media branch where we talk Jersey Shore weather. So, I want to unite the shore through weather, keeping people informed and positively prepared for weather hazards. And then, of course, helping businesses who might, not have the means to do a full, $5,000 a month campaign ad, be able to get professional advertising and marketing through what I offer. And then also the drone, as that is the second part. That really nothing to do with weather. That just became a hobby of mine that I've turned into, part of my career. So I do help people get their Part 107 license to fly commercially. And then, when people need drone footage for 5K race or a movie or a documentary, they call me up.
Well, Joe, what I like about this, it's very versatile. You're hitting these different channels, right? You get people that are interested in drone, people that are interested in community, preparing their community for disasters. And then I know you're on social media all the time, just with the weekly and the weekend forecast. It seems like you're hitting all these different lanes, engaging people from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I mean, it's busy. And, to be honest, I'm in a lot of different places, but I'm doing this because I know it's going to be better as we go forward to the future. And in a lot of ways, the media work that I do is how people know me. And that's how we can talk about, hey, you want to be part of the Shorely Safe program? Do you need drone footage for something? But being in the community, I want to be in the streets. I want to be in the community. And you don't have to be in the physical streets. You can be on the internet streets, right, Hal? I mean, Reddit pages, community groups, being a part of that town.
Yeah, for sure. So many different angles of engagement now, and it seems like you're really, really involved in a lot of those. Joe, let's talk about the challenges of forecasting weather for your area of the country. I mean, physically in Jersey, you've been in the deep freeze now for weeks. You can have a lot of blizzards, Arctic air, but then in the summertime, you're forecasting hot beach weather and even have to keep an eye on hurricanes. I mean, you're covering a wide range of weather hazards. What are the challenges with keeping on top of all that?
Yeah, so there's 2 things. One, we have 4 distinct seasons. And anytime you have 4 distinct seasons, there's going to be those ups and downs and lefts and rights and everything. But, for us specifically covering the Jersey Shore, we have 2 separate microclimates. We have a literal beach town microclimate, and then we have an inland microclimate. So while I cover 4 coastal counties, there's inland parts to that, and there's beach towns or barrier islands parts to that. And particularly during the spring and summer, there are days where you're talking to some people about, hey, it's a beautiful spring day, it's 75 degrees, but hey, I can't say it's beautiful everywhere, because in Atlantic City, it might be 49 with an east wind blowing that cold ocean. So you have those impacts, you have the coastal flooding, and, we talk about coastal flooding and coastal things year round. And that's just something that isn't seen, on other places. And that's not to knock anywhere else that is covering weather. It's just that's our focus, and that's what we're doing.
Well, that's a good point, Joe. Like where I live on the Gulf Coast, when people think coastal flooding, they're thinking hurricanes. Where you're at, you have the hurricane threat, but you also have some monster nor'easters in the winter and the springtime that can produce massive coastal flood events there, even in the wintertime.
Yeah, I mean, look, we like to say we have a 12-month hurricane season because of the nor'easters bring, A, coastal flooding more frequently than hurricanes do, but B, Sandy aside, and you know this more than I do, but in our top 10, I would imagine most of our top 10 for flooding comes from nor'easters, not from hurricanes. So we have to be aware of that October through, April.
Yeah, for sure. The winter and spring there, it can be pretty vicious. And these are non-named storms that sometimes don't hit the national media as much, but they can really have a big impact there in the Jersey Shore. Joe, let's also talk about the social challenges of forecasting in Jersey. I mean, when I've been there, I've talked to a lot of proud residents that say, we've been here for 6, 7, 8 generations. We're born and raised in the Garden State. And then you got a lot of folks that, are based out of big cities in the region, Philly, New York, that have second homes at the beach that sit vacant much of the year. I mean, what are the challenges of forecasting weather for these areas that are, especially say like these beach towns where you have a lot of vacation and second homes?
Yeah, so there's a few different challenges here. One is the fact that some people are here year round. Most people are not. And if you're someone who maybe just day trips to the shore or has a home here, or you spend a week, you probably don't know about the coastal and marine hazards like people who are here year round. A great example was that in August we had we didn't get hit by Hurricane Aaron, but Hurricane Aaron was offshore, but it brought the highest summertime tidal flooding for parts of the Jersey Shore. And if you weren't number one, you were in the top 3. And people just weren't used to it. They're like, what is all this water? There was no rain. What is all this water here? And you have to communicate those threats. I would say, secondly, too, you look geographically and culturally at New Jersey, and there is a North Jersey, a South Jersey, and there's a Central Jersey. Hal, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, that there's not a Central Jersey, because there is a Central Jersey. But here at the shore, we are split between Central Jersey and South Jersey, or a New York influence and a Philadelphia influence. And my job, covering the whole Jersey Shore, is to say, hey, look, I get it. If you're in Asbury Park, culturally, you probably don't have a lot in common with someone who lives in Wildwood year round, but your climate is the same. You have the same concerns. You have the same great beach days, so that's really, I took that onus upon myself, and I felt uniquely positioned to bridge that, because I've spent a lot of time at the southern part of the shore. I live at the northern part of the shore right now, so I can speak to everybody at the same time, and I know what to say.
No, Joe, that's right. I mean, you get these different distinct populations. I know when I've been in extreme North Jersey, places like Sandy Hook, for example.
Oh, that's Central Jersey, Hal. We already talked about this.
We've been through this before. I like joking with you about that. But yeah, you're right. These different areas, well, they relate differently in their populations. You get to those areas near Sandy Hook, they're not far from New York City. And then I know when I've been in Avalon, Stone Harbor, you're pulling a lot more people from Philly and stuff. It's amazing how much it changes across a short distance.
Yeah, it really does. And, and again, I think I'm uniquely positioned to really speak to everybody at the same time, and to show people, hey, look, we're covering Jersey Shore weather, and there's no one that's focused on the 4 coastal counties for weather like we are here.
No, that's wonderful. And I love that you're talking too about these coastal hazards, informing and educating people that might live inland that don't have as much experience with that. And Joe, this gets into the work that you're doing with the FEMA CRS ratings on a local scale, helping people improve their CRS score. Could you explain to us what a CRS score is, and why is this important?
Yeah, so the community rating system allows towns to do certain work or projects that then give their residents or homeowners discounts on their national flood insurance policies. If you have a mortgage, and if you have a federal mortgage and you live in a flood zone, you have to have flood insurance. So at the Jersey Shore, that's a $97 million per year business. Just the flood insurance alone, not the value of the homes, the flood insurance. And there's 110,000 policies in force throughout New Jersey here. So, what we do is, we are able to do certain things that help towns get additional points. And really, if you can say, as you go from class to class, there's 10 classes, Hal. As you go from class 10, which is 0%, to class 1, which is 45% discount, you're getting a 5% extra discount. So what we like to say is, hey, look, you work with us, we're working in your towns. I would say we're different from other weather consultants in the sense that, again, we are physically in your towns, recording content, filming content, and we're maintaining contact with the clients. So as you know, in other weather consultants where the clients will come to you, we're trying to proactively go to them and, talk. And even if there's no bad weather, just catch it up. Hey, how's it going? What do you need? What can we do for you? We're trying to be a white glove service for them with the ability to take on those weather communications, especially in those bigger towns where they might call a press conference for a winter storm and there's local media there. We can handle that. I've done media interviews on behalf of towns for stories that have to do with weather, and they say, hey, you know what? Let's talk to, hey, Avalon's one of my towns. They said, hey, talk to Joe about this. Joe could answer those kind of questions. We know that commissioners and elected officials have a lot on their plates. Weather's something that we can help them out with, for sure.
So it seems like a lot of what you do is taking initiative, cultivating these relationships, and then just expanding that over time, offering more services and expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Hal.
Yeah, Joe, I wanted to ask too, when you get into these CRS activities that communities can do to improve their score and lower their insurance premiums, is a lot of that related to education? I mean, what are maybe a couple of these things that come to mind, ways that communities can improve their CRS score?
Yeah, so there's many different ways. What we focus on a lot is public outreach and flood warning and response. So for example, we could have a seminar in a town that talks about flood insurance, and I'm there talking about a hurricane forecast or things you should know about CRS. That helps increase your score. We do public engagement, what we call evergreen videos about, this is where minor, moderate, and major flood stage looks like in your town, or this is what emergency management does. And there are videos that go to the public. And then what we do too is when the weather is significant, let's say, we do town-specific videos. So, we don't talk about the towns next to you. We talk about your town. Now, that comes particularly helpful in a flooding situation because we will know what streets flood, we know what streets won't, and we actually have the time to talk about those, as opposed to my public videos where, look, I'm going to do a video for 3 or 4 minutes. I can't talk about every street that's going to flood, at the whole Jersey Shore, but I can do that if we're focusing on one town. And we've seen really good response that we're talking about those individual towns as opposed to a whole, as a region as a whole.
Joe, those town-specific videos, are those more in anticipation of an actual flood event, or do you do them more just in general, like long-term, these are your geographic hazards?
Yeah, so they're more in anticipation of certain events. They don't have to be flooding specific. I mean, we had, winter storm on January 25th that brought a little bit of tidal flooding, but more snow, sleet, rain. We do that. But it's not longer range. It's, the longer range stuff, for example, like a hurricane forecast or a winter outlook, that would be handled by the public events that the town contracts with us to do.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And man, I've seen with coastal flooding, people love that hyper local view of like, hey, Joe Martucci's in my neighborhood, right? He's talking about what's going to happen. And you know how coastal flooding is so localized. I mean, it's hard to generalize for a whole city. If you can go at the street level, it seems like you're engaging people at a more accurate scale, maybe.
Yeah, we're definitely trying. And, our towns, that we have are great partners in the sense that they already know, a lot of times the towns, the administrations, they know which streets are going to flood, or they know where it's going to flood, but might not have the tools or the bandwidth to communicate those in a way that's engaging to the public. And look, we're recording this on video right now, people like video, and it's been proven by the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, that people are 3 times more likely to take action when when watching a video as opposed to reading text. So that's why we're video focused. I have the video skills, not only presenting, but editing as well. We have a team that works on that, and we're able to give that to the town and say, here you go, use that for your residents.
Well, you're right, Joe. I mean, your work looks so professional and so sharp, but like you said, it's more engaging for folks, and it's just going viral, right, on all these different platforms that can share it. It's amazing the reach that you can have with that. And Joe, that really gets into the next topic we wanted to talk about. I mean, you are continuing to push the boundaries on digital meteorology. Could you talk about, I mean, it's amazing just to think about how the world of media has changed, say, in the last 10 years. What are some of the opportunities and challenges with working in digital meteorology?
Yeah, so I think number one is just endless experimentation. There's the guardrails are off, and I don't mean that in a bad way, although it could be in a bad way too, but in a positive way. I mean, like for example, like I've seen, on my Facebook page, a significant increase. I don't know if it's double, but let's say 50% to 100% increase in video views per month because I'm doing video differently. They're short 15, 20-second videos. I'm not even talking to them, but I'm presenting information that people want. And I'm not, doing it in 1x1 format, at square format, things like that. I think I heard this, I forget where I read this, but they were talking about Snoop Dogg at the Olympics, which is fitting because we're recording this during the Olympics, and how he's managed to pivot through so many different decades of different media. And, they said, well, he's still himself, but he's open to being himself in different formats. And listen, I'm not perfect at that, and I'm not Snoop Dogg, but I try to take that message with me, every day. So I think those are the opportunities. The challenges, are things that I think we all know. But I'll try to get a little more specific. Disinformation and misinformation on, websites and social media. Some could be well-meaning, some might not, but that is out there. And, I'll get things that are like, Joe, what's the, I heard, 22 days out, looks like could be a snowstorm. What do you think? And, part of me has to be like, oh, well, that's nice they came to me. But the other part is like, why are we talking about that? Like, secondly, I think specific, social media, and I love social media because I make a business off of it. It's great. But the one thing I would say is the timestamps on these posts are so small, and that people, and I don't blame them. Like, you don't know when stuff's being posted. I'll get comments, from something I posted 2 weeks ago saying, this ain't going to happen this weekend. What are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, I know that. So, I've had to adjust, I'm learning and adjusting. I'm always making sure to put at the very least, the day of the week, but really trying to put like 2/12 or 2/14, whatever it is on that too. And then, the other challenge too is, who to trust. And this has been a constant problem in media and meteorology, where people who are not degreed meteorologists, are posting information. I don't want to say meteorology, but saying that meteorology or oceanography, they're not in that realm, but they're posting. And, again, I don't necessarily think you need a meteorology degree to communicate weather effectively, but at the same time, you have to be cognizant that that person who doesn't have a degree can't work for the National Weather Service. They can't work for NOAA. They're not going to work at WeatherWorks, where I had my first job. And you learn so much in those jobs that I think are relevant to your career as a whole.
Joe, this is fascinating. I love this conversation we're having. I wanted to ask you, when you said endless experimentation, I mean, that implies you're changing things, you're tweaking things, you're taking feedback. How does your feedback loop look? Like, for example, are you looking at metrics for like views and reach? Are you looking at comments that people give you, what they like or don't like? I mean, how do you experiment and then, improve for your next iteration?
Well, yeah, great question. I think the answer is all of it, but I would say, most of it's through metrics. We've had, some really good growth on social media, since I've started my business, as a result of experimentation. And, the way it's not so much, again, the content's the same. It's just the way you're presenting it that is different. Like I'll give you an example. Like in January, on Facebook alone, we had 2.85 million impressions in the month of January, right? Last January was 463,000 impressions. We had per month in 2025, we had nearly 2.5 times more impressions per month than we did in 2024. And it's just part of experimentation. That sounds, it's not, I can't say I'm doing anything revolutionary, but I'm making sure that, hey, people, again, using this example, people like these 15, 20-second long videos that are showing information that I'm putting out about a certain, good weather, bad weather, but, they have music on it, and they have, it's in a 1x1 format or a 9x16, and putting those things out, like that stuff, like you could laugh at it and say that's trivial, but it matters. And I can tell someone who's doing social media right and someone who's not, who's not doing social media right based on those kind of things. And of course, it ultimately comes down to how good is the forecast, because or the weather content. I've said this many times before, if your generic iPhone weather app, if it's wrong 12 times in a row, you're probably still going to buy an iPhone. But if I was wrong 12 times in a row, you're probably going to tune me out in one way or another, right? So I have to be accurate.
Yeah, you're right. We still need what I'm learning from you on this is we need the expertise, we need the credibility, reliability, we need the accuracy, but also don't be afraid to experiment with communicating in different ways and different platforms, and to be willing to make some changes.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add, I should have said this at the top. Reddit has been big for me in the last couple of months. A lot of I don't know the exact number, but I would say a significant amount of traction to my website comes from Reddit directly. And it feels pure, in many ways, to me, and it's community based. And there's a lot of good interaction on there. And that's just been one way I've been, again, branching out in a different way and putting information there.
I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, do you find some combination of short form content, like reels with music, and then also maybe doing longer lives? I mean, how do you mix these different types of engagement on a digital platform?
Yeah, so I think this still comes down to the fact that you need to be consistent in some way. So we don't need to have I don't need to have a 4 o'clock weather news, a 5 o'clock weather news, and a 6 o'clock weather news. But what I do make sure is, I have a video that goes out, during the 5 days a week and more when the weather's active at 7 or 7:15 a.m. And that is your 3-4 minute long weather broadcast. That would be traditional, right? Or in a traditional type of format. But then, after that, everything else is that experimentation part. So I want people to know, hey, check my website, check my YouTube, check my social media, at 7:15 a.m. We're going to have a morning forecast for you. And then the rest of the day, we're talking about the weather. And one thing I've learned, Hal, and I almost cringe at my 2017 self when I worked at the Press of Atlantic City, which is everything doesn't have to be, number forecast specific. What I mean by that is I don't need to, not all of my social media content needs to be, it's 57 degrees tomorrow. Oh, it's a warm day. What do people want to know? And that ultimately feeds into algorithms and search and SEO and search. And so I'm talking about today's, when we're recording this, we're talking about the Climate Prediction Center 6 to 10 day long outlook and how it's warmer. It's finally warmer, warmer than average for the first time in a while. And we're talking about, the longest stretches with snow cover on the ground here. That's something that I would say is more interesting to typical person than, hey, it's going to be 57 degrees tomorrow. It's going to be warm. People probably know that, generally, but you have to give things your generic phone weather apps aren't telling you. That is the key.
Well, it almost gets into storytelling, right? What are the bigger stories that are interesting to people? Obviously, the Mid-Atlantic's been in the deep freeze for a long time. Everyone's got to be wondering, when does it break, right? It sounds like engaging that story might be more interesting to them than knowing it's going to be 61 degrees on some afternoon.
Right. Just keep hitting it. And, look, there's a time and a place for showing temperatures, and what it's going to be. So I'm not discrediting that. But if, the big story right here, again, to your point, the Mid-Atlantic is there's been snow on the ground for weeks. Rivers, bays, they're all frozen over, and water temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean are below 32 degrees. Of course, it's, because it's salt water, it's not frozen, but that's something cool. You still want to educate. It's again, like we said, a few times already, same content, right? But you're free to express that content in different ways. Whereas, working in television, and which is, again, fantastic. I'm not here to discredit it, but, in television, you might have 20 seconds to talk about that. And I could talk about that in a social post that people might read for 2 minutes. I might do a separate video on it. And the results, most of the time, the engagement's there. And I appreciate that.
So it sounds like your opportunity with a digital meteorology platform, you have more options maybe to engage in different ways, different angles for different time lengths as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Joe, love this conversation with you. We could go on forever, but just really love, I know our listeners are really going to enjoy this. We focus a lot on great weather communication. Our listeners are going to want to know, how do I find this Joe Martucci guy? I mean, how can people find you on these different digital platforms?
Yeah, so my social media is at JoeMartWX. So JoeMartWX. You go to any social platform, I'm there. My website, you can go, they're both going to take you to the same place. So whatever you remember is best. www.cupajoe.live for my business, CUPAJOE.live, or you can go to jerseywx.com, jerseyweather.com. So whatever one works for you works for me just as well.
Well, Joe, we've known each other for some time, and I found your content too. Obviously, it has a Jersey focus, but you're touching on regional and national stories too as well. I love engaging and following your work. I know our listeners will as well. Joe, as we wrap up the podcast, I wanted to ask you, what's one last take-home message you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I promise this is one sentence because I did think about it, but it's maybe a little bit longer. Know when things are posted to social media, make sure you know who your source is. Are they someone that's reputable? And enjoy the weather. I mean, enjoy the weather, right? Even in the bone-chilling cold that we have here in the mid-Atlantic, people are still outside. They're like, look at the ice. I'm ice skating. I'm ice sailing. I'm not going to see this again for a long time. So there's always something to enjoy.
Oh, that's right. And it sticks with our memories, right? 20 years from now, people will look back and say, that has to be 2026. That was a brutal winter. It sticks with us for a long time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Joe, thanks so much for taking time to come on the podcast. Best wishes to you, and we're excited to continue following your work.
Thanks, Howard. Looking forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Joe, thank you so much for taking time to come on the podcast. I learned a ton from you in this episode. I mean, probably dozens of things, but three main things stand out to me. Number one was a message really for people who consume weather information, for the audience out there. Make sure you're finding a trusted source, especially someone with a lot of local expertise. Joe is sharing he's lived his entire life in New Jersey. He knows the nuances and the details about New Jersey weather and climate. He was sharing, for example, about microclimates. I remember as a kid going to Avalon, New Jersey in the summer, and when you went out to the Barrier Island, there was a big sign saying Avalon is cooler by a mile because of the sea breeze. Joe understands all of these nuances, and he's going to explain this on his broadcast, on his content, and his forecasts in general are going to be more accurate than something you're going to find on a generic weather app. So definitely find an expert, find someone that's reliable, but also who has that local knowledge and a lot of experience. Number two, a message for weather and science communicators. I thought it was really interesting what Joe said about storytelling and about getting into stories and weather communication that go beyond the numbers. Weather forecasting and communication needs to be more than just telling people what the high temperature is going to be tomorrow. That's something that they could get on any weather app. But he talked about really getting beneath those numbers and digging deeper, finding these stories that connect with people. This past winter has been brutal in New Jersey, and I've seen a lot of Joe's content gets into this record-long length of snowpack, and he's been showing ice-covered bays like Delaware Bay, unusual stuff that they usually don't see. It's engaging with the audience. It's unique. It's novel, but it's also something you can't just find anywhere else. Lastly, I thought it was really interesting that Joe was talking about giving yourself the freedom to experiment on different social media platforms. That's the beauty of living in the age of digital meteorology. You can explore and experiment with different platforms, but he did give advice to find some level of consistency so your listeners and viewers can know where and when they can find you. Joe, thanks again for taking time to come on the podcast. I learned a ton. I know our listeners are going to love this episode. And again, follow Joe not only for what's happening with weather in New Jersey, but in the Northeast region and really national. He's covering stories that are really engaging and very interesting and educational. Joe, thanks again for coming on the podcast. And thanks everyone for your support of the GeoTrek podcast, making us a top podcast on the topic of natural disasters. I'm your host, Hurricane Hal, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the GeoTrek podcast.